Hi everybody and welcome back to my War Games hobby channel. Alec here. Today I'm going to do something I've never done before. I'm going to review some of the paints that I've been using. I just thought you might find it interesting to see what I felt anyway. I'm sure there are more professional painters out there that will cover this in more detail than I can, but I just thought I'd let you know how I was getting on with these new paints. Now, about sort of a year ago, a good friend of mine, Dom, that's Dom from Boots on the Table, he's been using contrast paints for some time to very good effect, and he persuaded me to have a go. So I bought a half a dozen colours just to give it a try, see how I got on with them. And here is the first unit that I painted. I only needed a few more skirmishers for some Crusaders that I've been using, and then I added some Saracens as well, bowmen and spearmen, as you can see. And I have to say I was very pleasantly surprised how easy it was to adapt to that sort of style of painting. It's slightly different. It took a little bit of getting used to, but it wasn't too complicated. And I suppose I would consider myself only an average painter, maybe slightly above average. I don't know. I certainly can't compete with some of my mates who really are fantastic painters, and I haven't got the ability to do that all the time, to spend on painting up to the figures of the standard that you sometimes see. But I like to think that my figures are painted to what I would call an acceptable war game standard. And I think Dom is the same as me. I don't think he would ever consider himself a top painter, but he does a reasonable job like I do. And anything that will help that along is a good thing. And contrast paints seem to do that. I think you all know what they are. You only put one sort of coat on each level of the figure once it's been undercoated, whether it be with white or of lightish grey. It needs to be a light colour that you undercoat. You can't put it on a black undercoat. It has to be a light colour. And it makes me look like a better painter than I am. So anything that does that is good. And I've used them now for this past year, and I'm totally converted, frankly. I don't really use anything else now. I think there's the odd colour sometimes. I suppose my figures are now sort of 90% contrast paints, sometimes even 100%. There's the odd colour sometimes I need to use. I've been painting up, my biggest project this year has been painting up an Austrian and French Napoleonic skirmish army for muskets and tomahawks, the shako and bayonet supplement to the muskets and tomahawk rules. And here's the, let me just show you. So here are the French that I've been working on. You can see here I've got 3 units of 6 skirmishers or voltigeurs. I've got 4 units of 8 line infantry, an artillery piece over here, and a unit of 8, or if you include the officer, 9 line lancers. And as you can see, they really come out well, and they are totally contrast paints. And I've been painting up the Austrians as well, which I've shown in previous videos. Austrians are difficult because they're a white uniform, and so I basically sprayed them white. You don't need to do a contrast on the white, but what I did do was I used Agrax Earthshade to dirty them up a little bit, to dull the white down, because certainly a white uniform on campaign wouldn't stay pristine white for very long. It would get very dirty very quickly. And in fact, you'll notice on my Austrians, I dirtied them up a bit anyway. I like dirty trousers, and if they're on campaign, they're not going to stay pretty for long, are they? And that's the same with most of the figures that I do. I don't like them to look pristine. I like them to look like they're on campaign. I didn't use the contrast pink. I used a normal paint for that. The facings, but the rest of it, the rest of the colours on there, like the backpacks and the helmet and the rifles and on all the leather equipment, they're all contrast paints. So to get back to the French, as you can see, that is the French blue, or the French blue that I've used. is in fact the ultramarines blue, and the red that I've used is the Blood Angels red. I use Dark Angels green for the plumes and the epaulets for the light infantry. And if you look at that, let me just pick one up and show you. Here we are, have a close-up of, see, that's all right, isn't it? I'm quite happy with that. As I say, contrast paints seem to make you look a better painter than you actually are. So I ended up buying initially just half a dozen, but in the end I ended up with considerably more. There we are. I've got 24 now, as you can see, putting them back where they should be. And I do most of my painting now using those colours. However, there's another set of colours coming out which are very similar to contrast paints, and that's the Army Painter Speed Paint. Now, I've been given these to try out by a friend of mine, and he just wanted me to try them out to see how they compare to contrast paints. Again, there's 24 in that set. This is the Speed Paint Mega Set, and there's 24 in there, so it's the same amount that I've got in my contrast paints, and that really should cover everything you need. And you'll notice over here I've pulled out the ones that I'm now going to be using on these 4 figures here, because these 4 figures have been undercoated, but they now need all the colours putting on. And as you can see, this is the last of the French that I'm painting. I've already started some here with contrast paint, so I'm not going to touch those. I've done the faces of these. With these 4 I've had nothing done, so I'm going to use those 4 as an experiment using the speed paint rather than contrast. It'll be interesting to see how close they are and how they compare, you know, to the ease of painting, and whether the end result is going to be as good as I'm getting with contrast paints. So as over the next sort of week or so, I'll be painting those figures up, and when they're finished I'll come back and tell you what I think. Right, just put that back over there for a minute. You can have a look at my French. The last thing to cover is cost, which is worth going over. Contrast paints at the moment, I've bought them all individually. I imagine you can buy them in bulk. You know, I haven't looked into that. I've just bought them all individually, and they vary in cost slightly, between £3.80 and £4. So let's say round up, they're £4 a pot. Obviously I've got 24 there, so it's cost me a little bit, just under £100 to get the whole set. Yeah, a total of £96. This set of the mega set apparently is going to retail. I'm not even sure whether they're out yet. I think they're due out anytime soon, and I believe the retail is around about £70 or £75, something like that. Anyway, I've seen them. I know you can pre-order them online, and there's one place I looked and they were £68.40. So there's obviously 24 there, so it works out, you know, about sort of £2.85, or say round up £3 a pot. They're both the same. They're both 18mm. They both hold 18mm of paint. So the Speed Painter look slightly cheaper, 25% cheaper. Okay, don't quote me on that. I'm just telling you what I've seen so far on pre-orders. If you buy them individually, they may well cost more anyway. You'll probably find that that's a deal because you're buying a box of 24. But if you do buy them individually, they may well be nearer to the £4 mark. I just don't know. Maybe someone can tell me what they think about that. So the cost, it isn't huge difference. It'll be, I think it'll be very, very similar cost. They're not going to make them a lot more expensive than contrast paints anyway. Contrast paints seem pretty well established at the moment. I know a lot of people that are using them. The speed paint, I think it'll be interesting to see whether people will convert to them, or maybe use a bit of both. So there we go. So that's what I'm going to do, guys. I'm going to stop this video because I need to get these figures painted, and it's going to take me, because I've got quite a bit on this next week outside the War Games hobby. I'm away for a few days, so it'll probably be about a week before I get them finished. But when they are finished, I'll come back and let you know what the result is. So here I am again. I've painted those figures I told you about. Let's have a look at them. In fact, I was going to do 4, but I did 6 in the end. And when you have a look at them, you'll see, in fact, on this next picture, you'll see on the right, they're the ones I did in the new speed paints, and on the left are the ones I did in contrast paints. And to be honest, you'd have to look really, really closely to see the difference. So what do I think of them? Well, the short answer is that they're the same. There's hardly any difference at all. I found that a couple of colours are slightly different, but if you look on the chart, I painted every single colour onto a bit of white paper. And if you have a look at what I've done here, you can see that a lot of the colours, you can see the 2 yellows are very similar, the 2 sort of lighter greens are almost identical. Most of the colours are the same. They're called something different, but most of them are the same. The flesh is very similar. So really the way they look at the end of the day is virtually the same. There are only 2 colours that were slightly different. Because I was doing French Napoleonic infantry, and I noticed that the dark blue that I used from speed paints is slightly darker than the dark blue that I use from contrast paints. But to be honest, again, mixed in with the unit, you'd really find it difficult to tell the difference. And the other thing is the backpack, the leather brown that both companies use is slightly different. The Speed Painter leather brown is a slightly sort of reddy leather brown rather than the contrast paints. Again, it's just a matter of choice. In fact, you could have units that are next to each other and you wouldn't, I'm sure leathers vary anyway. But really, other than that, there's no difference. So the short answer is, which is best? Well, neither. They're both the same. They both do the same job. They're both easy to use. I like the style that I use to paint them. I find them very easy indeed to put on. The one thing I would point out is with light colours, if you put it on quite thickly, it comes up a little bit darker. You've got to spread it out a bit if you want the lighter colour. So with the yellow, for example, you'll sometimes see it almost becomes orange if you put it on too thickly. But other than that, frankly, they're a doddle to use, and I like the effect. So the other difference really is the pots they come in. They both use the same, they both got 18mm of paint in there. And I mentioned cost before, because you're buying the Army Painter ones, the speed paints in a bulk of 24, they work out at just about £3 a pot. The contrast a little bit more, but if you buy them individually, you might find they're about the same. But the pots are different. With the Speed Painter, with all Army Painter paints, you have to pour them out onto a pallet like this. And the one good thing about this is they've got the ball bearing on the inside already, so when you shake them, you don't have to put a ball bearing in there to help mix it. It's already preloaded, which is a good idea. And the good positive thing about the Army Painter ones is if you should knock the pot over, you're not going to lose any paint. Whereas with the contrast paints, if you knock that over and it's opened, you're going to lose a lot of your paint. You've just got to be very careful. But where you're putting the paint onto a pallet, sometimes you might put too much on the pallet and that would then be wasted. It's not a big problem. I mean, there's advantages and disadvantages to whichever you look at. It wouldn't put me off buying contrast paints, the fact that if you knock them over, you're going to lose a lot of your paint because they're very watery. And it wouldn't put me off the little bit of wastage you get from the Army Painter ones when you put them onto a pallet. So really, if you're looking for a particular colour, then I would just go to whichever make you find matches the colour that you're looking for. But frankly, honestly, if you look at what I've done, there's nothing really between them. They're both really good to use. I get great results. I'm really pleased with my results. And so yeah, I would recommend them highly to anyone, whichever you decide to go with in the end. There's just one thing I will mention I found with the speed paints is when I finished painting them, I decided to put a little bit of Agrax Earthshade over the top. I haven't got any army painter that would do the same. And I noticed that on some of the dark colours, the blacks and the dark blues, there seemed to be a reaction to the paint because it went a little bit white. You can see on this picture here very, very faintly that that was all black. And now it looks as if I've dry brushed it with white, and I didn't do that. I don't know whether I did something wrong or whether, you know, the speed paints and the Citadel ones, Army Painter, don't mix. But as I say, I'll just put a watered down version of Agrax Earthshade over the top, which I do with all my figures. And there just seemed to be a little bit of a reaction where the white started to show through, the white undercoat. And I don't know whether anyone else will find that. There you go, guys. I hope you found that useful. I thought it would be interesting just to let you know what I thought about them. I'm really sold on these paints now, Contrast or Speed Painter, whichever one you want to use. They work for me really, really well, and I really can't be going back to normal. I can't see me going back to normal acrylics anytime soon. The odd thing I still do in acrylic, I mean, if you want the gold, for example, you can't beat acrylic gold, and maybe steel. But even so, you know, I'm really clutching at straws here. 95% of my figures are now painted with contrast paints, and also speed paints will now be included. If I want that leather colour that I mentioned, then I will get one. The only thing I've better mention this is that there's not, in the 24 from the speed paints, there's not a dark brown. There's a wood brown and there's a leather brown, but it's not a dark brown. And so if you're doing hair, for example, unless you're like me where you're quite grey, but most of my models I tend to use sort of a dark brown for doing the hair, and there isn't one, which is a bit odd. There is one in the contrast paints, but not in the speed paints. Maybe there will be one you can buy individually for that. And I haven't actually painted any horses with the speed paints either. I think there's probably, I would say, a slightly better choice of paints that would use for horses on the contrast paint range. The fact there's no dark brown doesn't help the argument for speed paints, but I'm sure, I say, that will be made available. But yeah, I'd highly recommend using these paints. They're absolutely brilliant. Right, see you again soon.